Welcome to Getting Rich Together. I'm your host, Syama Bunten. This show was born from my own journey. Coming out of a divorce, I reached out to 50 women to talk to them about money. 95% of them did not want to go there. That's when I realized we need spaces where wealth isn't hidden in silence, but shared in possibilities. Here, you'll meet women from all backgrounds, trailblazers, risk takers, visionaries, each expanding what wealth can look like. This is your place to be inspired, to discover new pathways, and to remember that we rise by building wealth together. Getting Rich Together is a Wealth Catalyst production. At Wealth Catalyst, we bring together education, networks, and great opportunities for women to build wealth and change the world. Now, on to today's show. I am here today with the fabulous Wendy Ryan. Wendy, your beautiful smile shines so deeply through the screen. I am so grateful to have you. Ladies, Wendy Ryan is a board advisor, angel investor, best-selling author of Learn, Lead, Lift. She's also featured in Show Her the Money for her work championing women founders. Wendy, you are prolific. You are known within the community for the ways in which you show up with integrity. I am so honored to have you share your story today on Getting Rich Together. Thank you for being here.
Oh, thanks for having me. I'm thrilled.
Yeah. Oh my God. So before you were looking fabulous with your hair done beautifully and lovely lipstick, you were once a little girl who probably knew nothing about how to do her hair and maybe about lipstick. Or maybe you did. I don't know. 10, 12 years old, I feel like I definitely wanted lipstick, but I was still wearing maybe that red chapstick,
Oh yeah.
putting a lot of it. Yeah,
totally.
Putting a lot of it on because I really wanted some color. But Wendy, take us back to 10, 12 years old. Where were you in this beautiful world of ours? What was life like? And what was money like?
Yeah. So I had an interesting childhood in that I moved around several times between the age of 2 and the age of 14. So a couple of different geographies, but started out, so I'll have to go back a little further. Started out life in Wichita, Kansas, where I was born, and I lived till I was 2. And then we moved to Fountain Valley, which is, those of your listeners who are from the LA area may recognize that's in that metropolis. And then ended up in Madison, Wisconsin for a few years. And then ended up in Saratoga, California, which is one of the suburbs of Silicon Valley. And so when I was 10 to 12, that's where we were living, was in Saratoga. And we were a middle to upper middle class on the socioeconomic ladder family. And we, always had kind of what we needed. But I remember there being some tension around money because my mom worked full-time as a nurse anesthetist. My dad also worked, but he had a little bit of trouble holding down the same job for a long period of time. So I think there was some tension around who was making money when and for whom. And when I was 12, my parents decided it was time to separate, and then it ended up divorcing.
Wow. I feel like early modeling of divorcing can also be just quite powerful. I know it's very traumatic, but also to be out of something that no longer serves you. When I was little, my mother and father, they divorced when I was 5, and then they got back together when I was 9. And I remember being like, I don't know if this is a good idea. It's like, you're like, there's a reason why you're not together. And it's so interesting, I think, as young people to think about, what are we responsible for? How does this impact us? So as you were kind of experiencing, not only being somewhat having lived in different cities, which obviously insinuates that you had to learn how to make friends a lot of the time, retell your story of hi, I'm Wendy. This is who I am. But then also divorce hits, and then there's this whole other third thing that comes in. So how did you kind of navigate that divorce, and what was that like for you? And how did you see your parents model decisions, and what were some of those money signals?
Yeah, I think, as happens to so many families, we were in a situation where the house that we were living in was going to need to be sold. as part of dividing the assets. And I think I remember very distinctly seeing how stressed my mom was about that. I think she was starting to look at condos and where was she going to live. And I remember one day she broke down in tears and was just crying, and I couldn't understand why. And now in hindsight, I get it. She was mourning the loss of the American dream, if you will, of home ownership, and now feeling like she was taking, a big step back. And that was, rightly or wrongly, that was really hard for her. And so I think that was informative for me as far as understanding, people really care about things like owning a home. People really care about this sense of forward momentum, and we're supposed to somehow be moving towards something bigger and better and not going the other direction. So I remember that really made an impact.
I think it's interesting now to think about this idea of, what does having a home mean? I know so many young people today are questioning what that is, but certainly for your mother, that would have been smack dab, and also for us, right? Smack dab in the middle of this is what building the dream is for, right? It's for these walls, right? For a sense of security, and to have that no longer be there means things feel less secure, right? Like what can you count on?
I'm sure at the time, the combination of feeling like her family was dissolving and homeownership was dissolving was just a lot. And even though she had a job, she could support herself, it was also scary. It was scary to do that with 2 children because my father was not reliable in terms of a source of income. So I think that pressure and that uncertainty was certainly something that impacted her.
What kind of impacts did this have in your high school years? Was it, okay, I'm going to work really hard. What's happening to my mom is not going to happen to me, and I'm going to double down on this stuff. Was it a fear cue to safety and protectionism? Or was it okay, we need to carve out this entrepreneurial vision? How did you start to internalize and express what was going on around you in terms of who you thought you were and what you thought you needed to be and do?
Yeah. So this is one of the first of several plot twists in my story, where as soon as my parents decided to separate, my mom went out on a date. So a month later, and she was set up on a blind date. And she happened to be set up with someone who she would instantly recognize was the true love of her life. And his name was Dan. And they married 1 month after my parents' divorce was finalized.
Wow. So I'm cool for her. And how did you feel?
You can imagine that's a whole nother episode, right? And a whole nother podcast on dealing with changing family dynamics when you're a preteen, so to speak, an early teenager. It's a really interesting time for all that to happen. But the moral of the story, I guess, or the bottom line is she didn't have to go live in that condo. So she sold that house, and we moved at that time to Los Altos because Dan happened to be wealthy. So that was interesting because Mom almost didn't marry him because she was very concerned about the fact that he earned more money and had more assets than she did. And she was very worried about the power, the disequilibrium of that, which again is something that in hindsight I learned and heard and understood more about. But she was so in love. They were so in love, and they really were perfect for each other. They ended up being married for almost 30 years until she died. So it was kind of like they were destined to be together, and my mom just had to get over whatever issues were in the way, whether it was money or, what are other people going to think? Because I just got divorced and 5 seconds later I'm married again. It's like she kind of had to put all that aside and just follow where the heart was leading so powerfully. And I think that was both beautiful, but also, I'm sure, concerning for a lot of people around her.
Yeah. And also go mom, it's really it's difficult to hold space, I think, for our own decisions, to have things make sense to ourselves, especially when what our heart tells us may not be logical, right? And to double down on sort of the information that we receive inside of ourselves. And and this is the way the world works, unfortunately, but then everyone else seems to have an opinion. And so then it's like, okay, so it's hard enough for me to figure out my own shit, but then I have to like explain myself to everyone else. And I'm still figuring out what I'm doing on this planet. So yeah, I mean, I get that in a lot of different ways. And so when you were in high school, I guess, like things have now materially changed for you, right? It's like you've had a very interesting life transformation of which you had very little to actually do with, right? It's like these things are happening around you. So how did you find a sense of control in your life? What did that look like?
Yeah. So I think to really illustrate how that felt in a tangible way, I remember very clearly during the divorce or leading up to the divorce. Do you remember, I don't know if you ever had or your family ever had, but they were like these sleeping bags that you would wear, and they had all these snaps, and they were kind of like Snugglies. And I think they came back a few years ago. There was some version of those that came back. We literally had those because my mom was like, we can't afford to leave to like have the heat on all day. So we were, in a fairly nice house in a nice neighborhood. But I remember going, oh, there's a limit to what we can afford. So we went from that to then living in a very nice house in Los Altos near the country club. And it was like, we never had to, again, wear those Snugglies. And my mom probably wanted to go burn them somewhere. I don't know, have some sort of cleansing ceremony. But that was a real kind of tangible experience. And it taught me a couple things. One is that what's going on appearance-wise is not always what's going on behind the scenes. And I think that's true for a lot of people. We think they're doing well, but maybe they are making some sacrifices. And mind you, we never had like not enough to eat or anything like that. So I cannot not acknowledge that. But these are the things that really stick with you, I think. And so when you ask me about how then I navigated money in high school, I was very motivated to work. I always felt like I wanted to be independent. I wanted to be able to support myself, rely on myself. And I think some of those experiences probably, I'm hardwired that way to some extent, but I think some of those experiences really reinforced it, watching my mom kind of struggle and navigate different circumstances in a pretty short period of time.
It's incredible. And so during those young years, as you were preparing yourself then to think about things like university, right? Was it, okay, I'm going to go study something that's going to guarantee me the job, right? So if you're going after security, it's always, false narrative is that the corporate man is the security. But, that's the thing that we're all raised to think about, right? Is like, that's what security is, at least when we're younger. How did you start to think about what you wanted to study, what you wanted to be, and how you would start to go about doing it? Because Los Altos is a beautiful area. You're close to Stanford. There are some really great schools and opportunities there. But how did you start to think about exporting yourself into the world?
I wish I had been more thoughtful about it at the time. So as you're asking the question, I'm thinking, yeah, wouldn't it have been good if I had been able to focus on it a little bit more?
Says no 17-year-old, by the way. Like, no 17-year-old is like, and then I thought strategically, actually, maybe not. Maybe there are, especially today. I think there are, but go ahead.
Like, I was kind of bored in school. And so I started working at Nordstrom. There was a kind of internship program through our high school. So I would go to school senior year for half the day, and then I would go and I would work half the day. And I just liked working. I wanted to work. I wanted to earn. I wasn't really strategic in terms of thinking, well, what would be the best path to guarantee security? It was more like, and maybe this is a Midwest, the Kansan in me coming out, but it's like, I'm just going to work hard. It really doesn't matter at what. I'm just going to, I work, and therefore I am okay.
I understand that. I mean, that is like I feel like there were so many times in my life where I was like, as long as I know how to do something that's of value, like I will always have that paycheck, and that will help me feel secure. As you found yourself, I mean, obviously, and you know, working retail, I think some people underestimate the things you learn on the ground, right? And like what you figure out. And I remember just like thinking about the experiences in retail where, you know, you get to be responsible for such large volumes of money, right? And like things are turning and you have such influence in so many ways, no matter where you are, you know, in the labor chain of working in retail. But as you went to university then, like what did you end up studying? And how did you sort of navigate the selection process of your future alma mater?
So I really didn't have any idea what I wanted to do in high school. And I was really envious of my mom, who from the day she was born always claimed, I just wanted to be a nurse. Like that was just, I always wanted to be a nurse. Fortunately, that was one of the 3 choices that were actually on the menu for her, because when she grew up as a young woman coming of age in the 50s, she was told very lovingly and sincerely by my grandfather, Kay, you can be anything you want to be. You could be a teacher, you could be a secretary, or even a nurse. Fortunately, one of those was already kind of on her menu. That was apparently the extent of the menu. And so how that then evolved for, I think, my mom and Dan at that point, my stepdad really stepped into the dad role full force. They said, you can do anything you want to do. And they meant it, both literally and figuratively, because it was like, we can afford, you can go wherever you want to go to school. You can study whatever you want to study. But that wasn't actually very helpful, because no one was looking at me and saying, you know what, you're really good at this. Have you thought about that? You know, no one ever said, have you thought about being a CEO? Have you thought about being an investor someday or an educator? Any of those things. So I'm not sure, while I appreciate that the menu went from 3 courses to now it's almost
Unlimited. Yeah, totally.
There was no guidance with that. And I think it's important for young people for us to be mirrors for our sons and daughters and the youth in our lives, and to be able to notice things like, hey, you know, when you said that thing or did that thing or gave that presentation, you did a really good job, and here's why, and to be specific. So I think that would have been helpful. And the proof I'm going to cite for this is that I did go to UC Davis. I got in. I'm not sure I would have gotten in now because things have changed a little bit, but I got in, and I changed my major 3 times while I was there, because I was still trying to figure out what my lane was and what I wanted to do. And I ultimately landed on psychology and Spanish, because those were 2 things, frankly, that I found really easy for me and I enjoyed.
You know, it's also interesting because some people study some things in college and then they never use those skills again. But you, my love, have been implementing what you studied in school your whole life. And it's like, which is really incredible, right? To be like, some people are like, yeah, I didn't need to study that. I never looked at it again. And you're like, oh yeah, that college degree, like I've been juicing it for all that it is worth. I love that. And so as you were starting to think then, you know, obviously there's this interesting point, I think, of contrast, right? When you know that your family has in your young mind, unlimited resources, though they would probably not say that, but you know, in your young mind, it's like, I can, you know, do anything, or can you help with this? Or is there this? Like, you know, I think that there are constraints that are oftentimes self-imposed constraints. There are constraints that are imposed by others. And there are stories and things that sort of define how we think about ourselves, regardless of like our financial situation, right? And I think that our young needs to sort of prove ourselves is probably one of those, right? Like, I'm gonna prove that I can fill in the blank. As you were graduating college and starting to think about working and like what that would look like. And obviously, whatever you get paid outside of college, like right outside of college, is usually not shit. It's usually like not great. So how did you kind of navigate that? Like, what was your first job like? How did you navigate being like, my parents could easily like really help me here, but I'm like trying to do this on my own, and there's tension there, I imagine. What was that like?
Yeah, it's interesting because since I didn't know what I wanted to do, they said, you can go anywhere, study anything. It's kind of like we have no opinion in the matter. But since you don't really know, why don't you just consider going to a UC school, right? A public school, because that way, and then if you later land on something, then go to the best grad school you possibly can in that field kind of thing. So, I mean, Davis is a great school. Don't get me wrong. It's not like, oh, I settled for UC Davis. But they're really, it's interesting because there was some efficiency and strategy in their thinking there of why overpay for a private school, right? Even if I could have gotten into a school with, let's say, an even more robust reputation. They didn't really see the point, and they didn't encourage that. And because I was a teenager, I was like, oh, good. I only have to fill out 4 applications or whatever. So I applied to 4 UCs. I got into 2, and I chose Davis. Wow. And that was that.
Oh, it's so great. I mean, I think it's really like, it's wonderful. Even though they gave you no boundaries, they did have pragmatic.
Yes, they were pragmatic people at the core. They were that way their whole lives. They were not frivolous with their wealth.
Yeah. I think it's really powerful modeling as well, right? It's like this idea of, especially, I remember watching the early like 90s, what is it? Like Robin Leach, and it's like, and you're like, oh, it's
lifestyles of the rich and famous,
and all of a sudden things get very real. And it's like, all right, but actually, where does the money go? And actually, like, what are the trade-offs and, all of that? What does it actually look like? And so talk to me a little bit about some of these early jobs you had, right? Was it a need to negotiate on salary? Was it something more like, I'm excited to prove myself? How did you start to build your career? Because also, there are so many folks who have, let's say, different career jumping off points and different strategies, but you've also had a fairly linear path in terms of your interests and your contribution to the world. And in an era where everyone's doubling down on, let's say, technical skills and being engineers, like you've also really sort of doubled down on people, right? And on the core of what I think is essential for humanity. So talk to me a little bit about some of these like building block days of your career and some of these pivotal moments where you started to understand both your own sort of zone of genius, if you will, the things you're uniquely good at, but then also building up a life, because like that's hard.
It took a while. As I approached the end of college, I had sort of two paths in mind, finally. The first path was, I'm going to become a therapist. I'm going to become a psychotherapist. I'm going to go get a PhD, and I'm going to do that track. The other path involved business, because I figured out that I really enjoyed business. And some of that was through the retail experience. I just kind of had a natural affinity for it. I enjoyed it. I thought it was fun to figure out, how do you make something work? So in a way, it was like engineering. But for me, it was like, it's just always been very easy and intuitive to look at a business and be like, I can tell if it's working or not working. And it's not about the numbers, because I'm not necessarily a numbers person. It's a systems. It's a way of being able to see systems that I've always had. I thought about those two paths. And as I started looking into PhD programs, I went, wait a minute, I'm going to spend another 5 years in school. And then I'm going to be a therapist, but I won't have had any or much real world experience. And that bothered me. And I thought, I think I want to give this business thing a try, because I could go back and do that PhD thing later, but I really want to see what that's like. But since I I really am drawn to people and to systems around people. Why don't I do human resources? Because that seemed on the face of it to be like where those two things intersected.
I mean, they do, right? I mean, it's so, like, I mean, it's like organizational design. It's like taking psychological principles and like figuring out, like, I mean, it's so like, it's really such a important, I feel like sometimes people don't really understand like what it means to like link up not just like skills on paper, but actual like psychological assessments of like how people can handle pressure and work within teams. And that's also super messy too, because it's like, you know, now if like people have problems, it's like you're right in the middle of it, Wendy.
So unfortunately for me, I graduated in a year when we were in a recession, and it was impossible to get a job in human resources, an entry-level job. So I do feel a lot of resonance and empathy with people going through this today that are new grads, that have worked hard, who have done well, and cannot find a job, and at least an entry level. So it took probably 4 months, which at the time was really long. And this was back in the day where, you know, you printed your resume, it was on nice paper, and you did all the in-person interviews. And I finally landed a temporary job for $10 an hour. And
I bet you used like nice resume paper.
Such nice paper.
Like, was it really good resume paper?
Yeah. Like it was like, it was solid. You know, I was proud of it. It was like the linen finish, you know, it was like nice. And it was with a temporary placement agency. And so what we would do is basically every morning at 7 a.m., we would come in and we would get calls from all the local companies in Silicon Valley who were doing like light assembly, like circuit boards, soldering, doing light packaging kind of thing. There was more of that in that time. And they would say, okay, Roberta would call and say, okay, I need 15 assemblers, you know, at 9 a.m. And then we would just start, you know, dialing for those people. We had our database on a mainframe of people who had come into our office and interviewed, and we'd qualified, and then we would send them out. And I mean, it was fast. The pace was just kind of insanity.
I mean, how crazy. I can imagine being like, all right, I got this one.
Yeah.
Like, and then like trading stocks on the exchange.
Yes, it was a lot like that, I imagine. And then the rest of the day, people would be coming in and we'd be interviewing, right? And building that database. So I did that for about a year. I felt like 5. I worked my ass off. I worked 12 hours a day, $10 an hour. And we had to wear, I'll never forget, and I tell people this now and they're blown away. You know, like my daughters are like, what? I can't believe this. We had to wear suits, you know, skirt suits.
That's
like
right.
James New York, the suit with the blouse that matched, whatever, pantyhose, high heels, 4 days a week. So Monday through Thursday. And then on Friday, the big thing is that we could wear a pantsuit. So, you know, you could wear pants. It was like, wow, casual Friday. And I had to afford that on $10 an hour.
Wow.
And when I think about it now, I'm like, what a mismatch. I mean, we should have been able to wear whatever.
Quick pause. I want to share something I'm hosting this year. It's called the Freedom 2026 Tour. I'm bringing small, in-person salons to cities across the country to talk openly about money, power, and choice. If you want to be part of one, the details are in the show notes below. Back to the episode.
It's so funny. I remember when I graduated college, the first thing I did was I opened up a Banana Republic credit card and I bought 2 suits and like 4 shirts that were like cropped, you know, just like stuff that was like of that time. And I wore the hell out of those things. I mean, it was like, that was like the Bible, right? It's like, oh my God. Okay. So you were there for a year, and then where did you sort of find yourself launch padding into the next things? Was it like, this is not for me? This is like, it sucks. Like, how do I find my next thing?
I was like, wow, if I'm going to work this hard, I'd like to get paid more. Because I was living with my parents and I was like, I can't afford to move out because it was kind of a tough situation. And it wasn't that they were tough to live with or didn't want me there. I just was very much in I should be living on my own.
Well, yeah, it's also tough to be like, oh, I'm in my 20s and, I'm having this date pick me up at my parents' house. I get it.
Exactly. Yeah. So I thought to myself, this is close to HR, but it's really recruiting. I'm doing recruiting and I'm doing sales, because the other thing we would do is go to potential clients or go to clients and drop off candy. And, I did a lot of sales calls with my manager. And that was, again, lots of learning, great experience, and not really what I had envisioned in terms of like doing organizational design or.
Yes, I understand.
Yes. So I left there. I got a job as an HR assistant. So I'm like, ooh, I'm moving from recruiting into actual HR. And I was there for about 4 months and I was doing affirmative action plans. That was all I did all day long, because back in the day, this was a government service contractor, and they needed to report all this. So it was gathering all the stats, putting it together in these reports, putting it in a binder, all those things. And one day my boss called me into the office and I really liked her. Her name was Renata. She was amazing. And she said, I think you should look for another job. And I was devastated. I just thought, the world is coming to an end. This is the worst thing that can possibly happen to a person. And she said, my friend has a job over at her company. I think you should go apply for it. And I was like, I didn't know what to do with that. I thought, well, is this a test?
Am I being demoted?
No, I can't. I want to work here. What am I supposed to do with this? So I went home. End of the day, went home, thought about it. And then there was this little voice inside of me that said, maybe the next morning, Wendy, and I'd actually talk about this in my book as well. But now, if your boss tells you you should think about looking for another job, it's probably wise to listen, regardless of the reason. And so I did take that advice. I applied for that job, and then I went to work for a company, a medical device company in HR, and really enjoyed that. I was there 2.5 years. So for me, comparatively, a long time.
Yeah, at that time, in terms of your adult years, like you're
I'm like, wow,
dedicated. Yeah. So were you able to move out? When did you move out? Like what
and then I think I moved out.
Okay.
I'm not exactly sure of the timing because it's been a minute, but I think that finally, then I was like, ooh, I'm making, $24,000 a year, whatever. Big changes. And I really enjoyed that job. I got to do a little bit of everything. So it was really a training ground for me of how to become an HR generalist, and really appreciated that opportunity.
That's so cool. I feel like what's also interesting about human resources is the different kinds of companies you get to see into. It's really like this. And then also the salaries people are getting paid and all the benefits and who negotiates and who doesn't, and how this shakes out. So spill the tea on this medical company. Like, what did you notice? Was there anything interesting that came up for you?
That was the first time that I had exposure to stock options, and they were ISOs incentive stock options back in the day. And I was actually, part of my responsibility was preparing the list because this company was growing fairly rapidly. And I got stock options. Every new hire got some stock options. And we had an employee stock purchase plan, which I did participate in. So when I left there 2.5 years later, I actually ended up selling that stock and I made money on it. And that was a powerful lesson in the value of being in that asset class. And also, I remember by then I was married at the time and telling my husband, well, we could hold out for the stock to go higher, but it's already appreciated quite a bit. I kind of feel like, we should just take the money off the table and then go do something else with it. And I think that set up a practice that I follow to this day, which is kind of, for lack of a better word, don't be greedy. If you've made a decent return on something, harvest that so you can now go create something else with that resource.
How old were you when you had this wisdom?
27, maybe?
That's
26.
that's a lot of wisdom.
Not too bad.
Like 27
Not too bad.
year old. Like that.
Yeah.
Give yourself some big credits here. Like that's like young and savvy. And so did that just come from your own like Wendy Ryan wisdom, or was that something you had picked up from like, professor? I mean, it sounds very intuitive, right? It sounds like something that was probably like my gut, my heart, my soul is telling me this is the right move. Can you attribute that to anyone else, or was it sort of your inner guidance that was leading you?
I think it was inner guidance. I think it ultimately comes back to what I have come to understand is fundamentally how I relate to money, or the relationship that I have to money, which is that in my worldview, money has no intrinsic value. It only has value when we actually exchange it for something. So if I'm saving all of my money, right, saving a ton of money, saving, putting it in an account, there is something that helps us feel more secure about that or good about ourselves, because we all want to think that on a rainy day, we've got access to something. But the reality is, it's sitting there isn't benefiting me right now. And so I think that what that has done, I've always seen money as it's a secondary currency. It's actually not a primary resource. It's a secondary resource. I forget what the technical terms are for that. But that always made a lot of sense to me. And so I think it has helped me have a really healthy respect for the value of money and capital, but also not be hooked emotionally. I don't, like, my ego doesn't go, ooh, wow, my bank account is up this month or down this month. Somehow I'm able to sort of stay detached enough from that. And I think that was true back then as well.
Powerful. It's also, to be so aware of your own values, right? Like, what is important to me? What is not important to me? Also at 27, to have some income come in that materially changes some things, right? Where you're like, oh, I can now make a different kind of a decision, or I have some more agency over my capital. What did you decide to do? Obviously you probably sold off some of that stock, but like, where did you then do with your money to start to build your young life? Was it buy a home? Was it like, we're working towards these goals? How did you start to exercise your capital?
Yeah. So the person I married, his name is John. We're still married today, very happily. We're just very fortunate to find each other. And he is very frugal, just inherently, biologically, genetically, however we want to think about that. So when we got married, I had a little bit of money. He had saved money, and we were able to buy a house immediately, which again is something that is very rare in the Bay Area for anyone that age. So we took advantage of that, and we bought our first home, which we still have today.
Wow.
Yeah.
Oh my God, that's so cool. I love that.
Yeah. It's not where we live now, but we still own it. So now it's an income generating property.
That's really fantastic. So then at this sort of early 30s, late 20s, like you already have a home, like how savvy, obviously you have exposure to equities because of your work experience, which is also something that I think not a lot of young people automatically get that sort of exposure to. At what points and how did you start to, build either in that capacity with, continuing to understand equities, or starting to think about, oh, I can have an income producing house, or, oh, there are other things that I can do with my money. When did those light bulbs start to go off for you?
I had the opportunity after I was with the medical device company for about 2.5 years. Shortly after I got married, I went and worked for a different company. And that company was doing outsourced HR because I was starting to feel like I couldn't really do what I wanted to do at the medical device company. I wanted to apply for a job that came open that was 2 levels above me. And my boss said, no, but you're doing this over here. And that was sort of not the right thing to say to me, because I saw that as a challenge that, yes, I could do the thing I was applying for plus, and I was going to go find somewhere else to do that. So I ended up at a outsourced HR company, and that was drinking through the fire hose. All of our clients were VC-backed startups, about 99%. We were growing very rapidly. We were the first to market with online benefits enrollment, a lot of things that were very innovative technologically. And this was the late 90s. It was the dot-com boom. There was new companies being created right and left every single day. And so my job was really to work with a portfolio of companies and work directly with the CEO. Mind you, some of these companies were 2 people, some were 100 people. They varied in size. But really to work with them and to be their HR generalist and handle everything from, helping their new hires get enrolled in benefits and understand those choices, but also, I think more importantly, to make strategic decisions about what they were going to offer people.
Oh my gosh. So at that time, you were like an active board member for like all these
kind of,
startups who are trying to navigate what's going on.
And I just kind of figured out how to do it because there wasn't like enough time or people at headquarters to kind of teach us how to do it. They were just like, oh, you seem pretty smart, pretty with it. You're pretty good with people. You'll figure it out.
So fun. And did you start to then get exposure, I guess, I imagine, to the like funding rounds and what some of the, what these funding rounds potentially did in terms of growth and scale of employees and starting to correlate maybe some of these different components?
Yes. And having, direct insight into compensation packages all across the board and stock options. And then what happened when you wanted to fire somebody that had a significant amount of stock or was an executive in your company. And then we had the dot-com, we had the crash. And then all of a sudden it was, okay, now how do we lay all these people off? And having to go through that side of the equation as well. So I got a pretty early and robust exposure to VC funding, to how do you do a startup and how do you think about all the people pieces of that.
That's so fascinating because it's also talk about something else that's really informed the rest of your life, as far as like how you now engage and support companies and invest in them. I think it's so interesting to think about also human resources as this like pathway where you are deeply needed when businesses are scaling and then deeply needed when businesses are downsizing. Like there is like always a need for someone who's willing to, oftentimes I feel like do the things that sometimes CEOs and founders don't want to do, which is like deliver the news and do so in like in a compassionate, kind way that has people's best interests at heart.
Yeah. And listen, most of them do it poorly. And not because they're all uncaring, self-centered people. I'm not suggesting that, but it really is it's a skill set and it's knowledge. And as much as I did not enjoy having to support that or see people lose their jobs, I was appreciative of the fact that I could kind of reduce the amount of unnecessary suffering because stupid things weren't being said to them, because the company was orchestrating things in a way that ensured a lot more dignity for people. And without that kind of guidance and coaching, I know a number of times it really would have been a far different experience for the people impacted. So,
wow. Had you at that point yet, Wendy, done any venture investing? Now you were seeing sort of how like the sausage is being made. And I feel like if most people saw how the sausage was being made, they'd be like, oh shit, this is how it works. Oh my God, this is wild. So
it's pretty messy.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So had you done any angel or venture investing at that point yet?
No, I'd had stock options again with that company that I was with. And they actually tapped me to lead kind of a new part of the business. So they were standing up a different service model and they wanted me to lead that. And I actually said no. And I said no because I said, I think you're over your skis. I don't think you're delivering. Like the company had grown so fast and was adding customers so fast. I said, I don't think we're going to be able to deliver what you want me to promise to deliver. And I can't be in my integrity and do that. And so I walked away. And had I stayed, this company later did get purchased by a strategic. So my stock, would have been worth more.
It's fun to like follow the stock. And so obviously, you and your husband had children and, there's like a family that's also emergent. Obviously, knowing that your children have grown up differently, at least before the age of 12 than you did, right? So there's like some real differences. How did you start to approach what life would look like at home? I find that there's often a bit of it's like, how do I give them everything in the world, but not give them everything in the world and allow for constraints to happen? And certainly, I think when things have been so different when we're young, right, when we have such contrast, there's a desire to protect and nurture and caretake. How did those things start to show up as you were raising a family?
Mm-hmm. So for us, we started having kids in our early 30s. So our whole kind of decade of the 30s was launching the family and figuring out how do we do childcare and work. Does one of us stay home? Does one of us work full time? Do both of us work part time? And we pretty much went through every potential configuration you can imagine. So at one point in time, I was working full time. My husband was working 1 day a week at being, as we would say in the day, Mr. Mom the rest of the time, and everything in between. And so we tried a lot of different things economically. We were not, my parents were not giving out money. It wasn't that we did have to work and we had to save, and we were very concerned about how are we going to send our kids to college? How are we going to make sure they get the best education and life experience? So we had to, like most people, really be mindful about that. And I never viewed my parents' assets as my money, ever. I always thought about it as that's theirs. They might live to be 120 and spend it all. Like I had no claim on it. And I really chose to live life as if that didn't exist. So aside from getting to go on some nice vacations with them, we really operated, again, much as a kind of typical middle class, upper middle class family would.
I think it's really, it speaks also to your, I'm going to do it on my own, like I'm gonna, don't tell me I can't do that, because now I'm going to go and show you that I can do that plus, which I think is something that I think a lot of women do, it's like very much around like, I will figure this out. I will show you. And no matter how scary it is, I've got this under control, no matter how scary it is, and what some of the uncertainties look like. As you developed your career in the consulting world, right? And sort of starting to build business and have your own business and start to sort of move into these different realms of career progression, but also of curiosity. I think it takes a great deal of risk and faith in oneself to say, I'm going to move into different stages of not being employed by the man, and sort of build something on my own. What unfolded for you? Like, what were some of these pivotal moments or inflection points where you were like, all right, my heart is telling me something else and I need to listen again? And as you decided to listen to yourself, was it, a family conversation and decision? Was it, I'm listening to myself and I'm going to make the case for it? Or how did you sort of figure out these different inflection points that started to unfold your path?
Probably more the latter. As you were asking, I was thinking my husband probably wish it was more the former, but that's not who he married. Yes. And thank goodness he's always been ultimately very supportive of all of my creative career directions and choices and so forth. So I did move from the outsourced HR company to independent consulting, but I did that with a firm. And so it was similar to other career transitions that I've made, and that I basically was thrown into the deep end of the pool and said, okay, now you are an executive coach. You're going to facilitate team development. You're going to use these assessments. You're going to give feedback. You're going to coach people, and good luck. So I kind of feel sorry for the first people I worked with because they didn't know they were guinea pigs. And I did not know it. I had some idea of what I was doing having worked in HR. You do develop some skills like that. But these were executives, these were people who probably rightfully had high expectations. And it took me a minute. But
I bet you over-delivered. I bet they were like, we have never experienced a woman like this who's like,
I was good.
Bringing all these. Yeah, I bet you really crushed it. And I bet no one had any idea.
I hope so. I was very good at it. And what I talk about now is I figured out the common denominator in all the things that I've done is that I am a very good integrator, synthesizer, educator, and now investor. And those things will, get you pretty far. A lot of the essence of coaching is you're just trying to integrate a lot of information quickly, put it together, and package it in a way that someone else can understand. And then they are compelled to do something.
I think that's really, yeah. No, I think that's it's a wonderful life skill to learn that, So it's coming to my mind. I'm like, yeah, you got to package it and make them do it. How do you keep doing that? At this time, as you were sort of building this consulting role, did things start to emerge for you around wanting to be the boss? It sounds like being the boss was always in your future and it was slowly coming out. When did you realize that you wanted to be the boss?
I came to that realization, it was 2014. So I did take a career break. I actually took 7 years. I thought it was going to be 2 years, maybe 3 years, because we had 3 children and it was crazy town for a while. And I thought, okay, I'm just going to, step back from consulting for 2-3 years until these two get into preschool kind of thing. It was all of it's, as so many working parents understand, it's all about the childcare and how you fit all that together. It ended up being 7 years. And during that time, I did volunteering. I always stayed kind of busy, and people would constantly ask me well, you work, right? So I guess I always came across as someone who was working even when I wasn't working, which is interesting. I joined the nursery co-op and then I ended up running it, right? So I always found myself throughout my life, a theme has been, yes, I have ended up being the boss. And not because I crave the spotlight necessarily. I just kind of know how things need to happen and get done. And people tend to have confidence in my ability to do so. So they're like, why don't you lead? Why don't you run this? And so that happened. And so then I was like, okay, it's time to go back. This was about 2011. Time to go back. And I could not get a job. So in HR, in consulting, everybody said the same thing, which is you're great. Your background's phenomenal. And we're going to hire this person instead who has more recent experience. And I remember feeling such cognitive dissonance because I thought, gosh, I am so much better than I was before I had to do this 7 years of like parenting and figuring all these other new things out. I don't understand that. It took a minute. And then the second that my old boss, principal at the consulting firm, heard that I was looking, she's like, oh my God, you have to come back and work for me. Because she knew what I was capable of doing. And so she didn't hesitate. She's like, oh my God, I need you yesterday. Come back. I've got plenty of work for you. And I was like, great. I didn't really want to go back and work for her, though. I wanted to take that next step. And so I think that was, while frustrating, that was valuable because she now had started partnering with a private equity firm and working with their portfolio companies. So in the 4 or 5 years that I was working with her firm again, I got to learn. I had learned about venture. I knew about startups. And now I was looking at what happens with middle market companies and private equity and how does that whole game work? And so I had a front row seat to that. And I worked with the leadership teams at a dozen of their portfolio companies. And it was intense. And it was a really good learning curve. And then I started to get restless. So after about 4 years of that, in 2014 to 2016, I thought, there's new things coming out. There's new models like neuro leadership. There's new theories and things. I want to try some new things. And at that time, the firm that I was working with, they weren't interested in changing. It was like, what we're doing is working for us. It makes our private equity partner really happy. And so we don't want to try new stuff. And I thought, well, if I want to do that, I'm going to have to build my own sandbox. I'm going to have to take a risk with my own name and reputation. And I also had this like burning desire to say, why is leadership development so hard? Why is most of it so not effective? And can I just create the blueprint for what great leadership is? I want to work on that. And so that's what I did. And that's why I launched Cadabra, my firm.
And so was that like, so did you guys talk about it at home? Like, we're going to launch this business and like, most people think, working for someone else, you work long hours, but then it's like you work for yourself and like, you can be the worst boss you've ever had. So there's like, there's also some dissonance here between like what people think it is and then like what it really is. So what were some of the ways in which your family and you guys experienced together the building of your business?
It's interesting because I made the decision to start building this business, but it was a soft launch. I continued to work for the other firm alongside of that, which was fine. There was no conflict there. I was an independent contractor for them. And it is not atypical in the leadership development business for people to be working for several different brands, if you will, or for us to work for each other under different brands. It's kind of there's just so many boutique firms and there's so many different specializations that are needed at some point that you kind of need that. The labor supply is very fluid that way. So I kind of made that decision. So it wasn't like I'm going to stop working for this firm and start my own firm. It wasn't a hard break. It was kind of a soft launch alongside. Yeah.
Well, that's easy.
So I don't think, yeah. So that was pretty easy. About 4 months after that, I decided, okay, I'm going to soft launch this. We had started to remodel our current home that we live in now. So we had moved out of our house. We were living with my dad at the time. And then he unfortunately passed away. Our remodel wasn't done. We were living in his house. We had no signed lease. We had no documentation. It was all a verbal agreement. And neither me nor any of the other siblings were executors. So there was a moment, and I think that's a teachable moment to share, is even when it's family, get your documentation. So then my husband and I were looking at each other going, shit, we have 3 little kids. We don't have a home, and they could come along and throw us out anytime. Now what do we do? So it was not a good feeling. And I remember my husband also turned to me and he said, you realize like, now there's probably going to be some sort of inheritance. And I'm like, well, what are you talking about? Because like I said earlier, I literally had never thought about it. I literally had never thought about it.
Totally.
So it was like I was in shock. I was in shock that he died. I was in shock at the timing. And I was in shock even just thinking about, oh, now we may have money that we haven't had before. And now a whole bunch of other decisions are going to have to be made. So I wasn't, frankly, working too hard on the new business at that time. I was just trying to kind of process all of this, and we were able to accelerate the remodel, get into our house. JP Morgan did not throw us out of the house. Thank you, JP Morgan. And all was well. And then that changed the trajectory of my financial life and my family's, for sure.
Wow. It's a lot to process. I don't think people really give these big moments enough space. It's a lot to say, these big life changes are happening. Someone who I love and care about is no longer in my life. And there's this other component that in many cases, it's like, okay, how am I supposed to feel about this?
Yes.
And like, what does this mean to me? And am I worthy or deserving, or what do I do? And how do I stay responsible? So how did you start to answer some of those questions around inheritance and what they would start to mean for you and your family?
Yeah, it was a really interesting journey. And I'm really aware of the fact that we are in the middle of the biggest wealth transfer in history, where more money is being inherited by women for some period of time. It's about a 10-year stretch than ever before in history. So as we talk about this, I just want to acknowledge, this is going to happen to a lot of women, is happening to a lot of women in particular, where you have a windfall, which is what an inheritance essentially is, regardless of the size, but there's so much grief around it. So if the reason that you're getting a windfall is because you've just lost your husband or your parents, it is very complicated, because it's very hard to feel happy about a windfall when you're deeply grieving. At the same time, having a windfall can also give you some feelings of relief and a little bit of excitement about now what's possible. Like for my husband and I, one of the really tangible changes that it made is that my parents had set up, as part of their estate plan, trust funds for all of the grandchildren to be used for education and so forth. So what it meant is all of the money that my husband and I have been trying to save for years to send our kids to college was no longer needed for that purpose. Wow. Which is huge. That's huge. Huge. And so there was appreciation around that, and a little bit of excitement, like, ooh, now maybe we can do some things we didn't dream of dreaming. I think the best way to describe it is enormous grief with a tiny sliver of hope for the possibility of dreaming.
So what were some of the early dreams that you started to piece together? All of a sudden now you get this, as you say, breathing room, right? To okay, I can step out of these primal parts of the brain that are worried about safety, security, family, like real things that so many humans today are living with, without being able to give themselves the ability to dream bigger. And now you have an opportunity to actually say, wow, I can think of a world now for myself, for my family, is maybe a little bit more sparklier, or a little bit more, there's something more magic, right? That happens when you can start to move away from the primal brain and start to move into dreaming states. So what were some of those early dreams that you started to have?
Remember, I think first it was, now if we really want to take a trip somewhere, if we want to go to Japan or we want to travel to XYZ, we actually really can do that without it being a huge trade-off for the budget. Without having to sacrifice something else, we can go do that, which felt really indulgent and wonderful. And we did take a couple of trips. We haven't gone totally crazy that way, but it was wonderful to feel like that was possible. And really what it meant for me as an entrepreneur is that I could continue to self-fund my business. And I didn't have to worry about, what is my revenue? It gave me the luxury of building at a pace that was sustainable for me and my family. And I didn't have to worry about how am I going to access capital if I need it. And that is not something I appreciated or realized at the time. I really took that for granted at the time because I didn't know. I didn't know that that's not most people's.
It's wild to think about the conditions that have to be right to become a founder. And what are the sacrifices most have to make to be able to see something come to reality. And it's something that I think is, some people have to take deep sacrifices. Others have to really leverage friends and family. Some don't have friends and family to leverage. Like there are so many different things that play into this world of being a founder and entrepreneur. And honestly, it's really over glamorized. It's like, I don't think enough people are like, do you know really how long it will take for this business to, especially if it's your first, right? If you've been doing businesses for some time, I think there's like some levels of like, I do understand how hard this is going to be. But in the beginning for your first one, it's difficult. It's challenging to think about customer acquisition, but then also paying for kids' education at the same time as thinking about customer acquisition and holding so many different things in your mind all at once that certainly having some financial pressure relieved, right, sort of gives you the opportunity to let your business become the thing it's going to become on its own time.
And, we were able to build a really beautiful, special business and team because all of those things were available to us. And I am forever grateful for that.
Yeah, it's powerful. At what point did you start getting more curious about the different asset classes you would start to invest in and sort of starting to think about what your capital could really be and do and create in this world?
I thought about angel investing. I started thinking about it in early 2018. And I cannot remember exactly why, except that I remember the idea came across my brain one day because I knew that some people did that. It was a thing. Because again, I knew about VC and I knew about private equity and I knew there were such a thing as angel investors too. And it immediately scared me. And I thought, oh no, that's not for me because I'm an HR person. I'm a leadership person. I'm not a investment banker. And I remember very distinctly kind of stopping myself in my tracks and going, that's exactly why you need to go do that. Because it's something that scares you, it makes you nervous, it's going to challenge you in a new way. And I'm a person that apparently likes to get thrown into, or if I'm not thrown into the deep end of the pool, I will just jump in. Apparently that's how I roll. Yeah, and I'll just figure that out too, because that's something new for me to figure out. And so I did. I joined Golden Seeds. I researched who was investing in women-led companies because at that point in 2018, I was really clear that women had a very different career and leadership journey than men did. And I somehow was waking up to the fact that it was also harder for them to access capital, that my ability to access capital was very unique and not common practice. And I thought, if I'm going to do this, I'm going to invest in other women founders, right? Other women entrepreneurs and help them succeed in their business. And that started my journey as an angel investor and as an LP in venture funds.
What was it like to write the first check? How did you feel? And
So much fun.
Yeah, was it just like, oh my God, I can't wait? What was the first check as an LP in a fund? Was the first check as an angel? So what was the first check? And what went down? How did you do this?
I was fortunate because I had chosen to join a group of angel investors, and I could watch and learn and had some mentorship, some examples. So I wasn't really even though I was in the deep end of the pool for sure, there were a few buoys or floaties I could grab onto once in a while to kind of help me orient and figure out what the hell I was doing. And I remember writing my first check, and it was like, it was $12,500, which is not a ton of money in the angel sphere. It's a whole lot of money for a lot of people. I want to acknowledge that. But in the angel sphere, it's not necessarily a huge amount of money. And I was like, oh, I didn't miss it. And it was fun. And I immediately thought, oh my God, I want to do this like 20 more times. It's so much fun, because I loved hearing about this founder's story. I loved hearing about her business and what she was trying to do. And it was so cool. And I thought the world needs this. And why isn't it here already? And all the things. And it was really interesting as I was observing other new angels in the group. And some people they kept waiting to write the first check. And they kept waiting to write the first check. And 6 months later, they were still waiting to write the first check. And I was just like, what's going on? Like, why aren't you writing checks? Aren't we here to write checks? Because I'm here to write checks. So there was definitely some judgment there on my part of, I'm a fast decision maker. I integrate, I synthesize, I make a determination, and I go. I don't take a long time to do that. And it's not right or wrong. There's some good things about being a little more deliberate, and some good things about not waiting too long. But I write checks like the way I do business, which is pretty.
Yeah. And you also have a strong connection to your intuition, right? And sort of like what feels right and what are the right moves. And, that seems like it's been really consistent over time, how you've chosen to make decisions and show up with integrity and your values. You have been an important part of Show Her the Money. And that is a film that many of the folks who are listening to the show are familiar with. But I'd love to just double click a little bit more on how you decided to go from being, let's say, behind the scenes and learning to in front of the scenes and being like, someone who's out there talking about these things and activating people with their capital and starting to evangelize, right? And being like, hey, if I can do this, like you can do this. And here's how we do it. How did you make that crossover from back of house to front of house?
I think because I've always been at heart a bit of an educator. It's natural for me, as soon as I feel like I kind of understand something, to want to explain it to someone else if they're interested. So I think that is really for me where the evangelization comes. It's like, I want everyone to, especially women, to be investors. I want, for so many reasons, right? And that's a whole nother episode. And anyone who's ever met the indomitable Catherine Gray knows that she's a force of nature. And so when she and I met, we were both speaking at a panel for a women's advocacy summit. And I remember her, following up later, and I was on her podcast, and because she knew I was an investor. And she said, I'm working on this film project. And have you ever invested in film? Would you be interested? And I said, never invested in film. Don't know anything about entertainment. It's the one industry I really have no experience with. But tell me about it. And as soon as I learned of what the film was about and the mission behind the film, I said, well, I'm in, because this film has to get made. Like in this case, I don't care if I make money. It just has to happen. So it felt to me like good stewardship of my wealth is to make sure this film got made. And that's how I got involved.
I love that. I love that it was also like a calling, like higher, like really, like, I don't know what I'm doing here, but I know I'm supposed to be here. And I know that whatever unfolds is exactly, so I'm just going to show up and do the thing that feels like the right thing to do. I love that so much, Wendy. So thinking, obviously we talked a little bit earlier about living long lives and, what it's going to be like when we're in our early 100s. I'd love to fast forward us to this young age of 102, 105, where you've had this prolific opportunity on this planet to change so many people's lives through not just what you do with your money, but also how you show up in this world. I think that integrity matched with capital alignment is really modeling of a new era. Like we need more role models like this. But if you could please play for me in your mind, this vision of legacy and this mark that you're leaving on the world, what might that look like from this vantage point of your young 100s?
I think it would certainly access to capital would be like very easy, So if you are someone with an idea and grit and the motivation to follow that through and the ability to do so, that no matter how you identify, yes, and where you are in the world, you can access the capital you need. And it's not such a struggle. And we are just not there yet for many reasons. But to me, what that does is it democratizes so many things. And we know that it's actually better when more people are economic value generators, right? And not fewer. And so I really see that as being a big dream because I believe wholeheartedly in human potential and human creativity. I've worked with people and people systems my whole career. I've seen what people are capable of, both incredibly wonderful, creative, out-of-the-box thinking, and also incredibly destructive, small, closed thinking. And I just think that we need more of the former, clearly. And the access to capital is probably the hugest piece because that's the system we have.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Well, we've spoken so much about different kinds of things with money, investing money, saving money, what it's like to not have much of it, what it's like to have money to change the world with. And what I'm most curious about as we sort of wrap up our conversation is around maybe some of the most fabulous or fun things that you have been able to do with your capital recently. What has brought you joy through exercising your capital?
That's a great question. The first thing that came up is we were able to make, but it's not so recent, but also around the time I started angel investing, my husband and I made a leadership gift to Notre Dame High School to create the Center for Women's Leadership. And we did not fund the whole building. Let me be clear, people. I wish I had that kind of capital. I don't. But just the fact that we were able to make a gift of a size that was considered a leadership gift. And actually, there's a room in that building that's called the Career and Life Success Center. And it is dedicated to my parents. So it has my parents' names on there. And that was probably the thing that I have felt most proud of in a way, because it was like not about me. It was about acknowledging the gift they gave to us. And my mom volunteered in education for many years after her nursing career. And I know like she would have been just, if she had been alive, like she would have made the gift, right? Like she would have just been all about it. So that's the thing that I come back to is like, okay, even if none of these other investments ever work out, which some of them have, okay, so I don't want anyone to think like, oh my God, she's like invested all this money and nothing's happened. No, I have made money. I'm happy about that. But to me, that's almost like the most impactful investment because that's investing in high school in girls, right? That's investing in the next generation of leaders and entrepreneurs and innovators and people that are going to save the world. And there's so much that happens in that building now that's just was unimaginable, before it existed. And that's going to, when I'm 102, that'll still be there.
Oh my God, Wendy.
Yeah.
You're so good. You're like, and I mean good, like you're good on, like through and through in your heart. Like you're a real good one. So happy to know you. I just wish I could give you a big hug. It's like so beautiful. My last question, Wendy, has to do around the things that you're calling in right now. It's clear, even now more than at the beginning of our conversation, that you stand in service for others and you are showing up always as servant leadership and really helping others unlock, have opportunities, and see a vision of themselves and the world that they want to create. But this last question really has to do about what you're calling in. What do you need right now? How can we support you? What could you use a little more of in your life?
Wow. I mean, we can all use more grace, right? We can. And so I always ask for that first. I think that the second thing is, you mentioned servant leadership, and I would love to gently correct you that it's learn, lead, lift leadership, because that's my leadership blueprint, which I don't want to knock. Servant leadership has a lot of things going for it. But one of the things I'm calling in right now is I made the strategic decision to close my business, Cadabra, in June of this year. And the reason I did that is because I found that I was no longer swimming in the deep end of the pool when it came to running the business, that it was time for me to jump into a new pool and into my third act. So I've done that. Learn, Lead, Lift is still alive and well. And it still, I think, has just barely begun to do its good work in the world. I feel like it's something that came to me in all of my experience. And it also encompasses the wisdom of so many other amazing people and leaders. So I think just intention around, if people are interested in that, if people can see that there's synergy between that model and their program. For example, if you're trying to develop leaders or founders or investors or what have you. Yeah, it's just, I want to talk. I want to find out what's possible for us to create together, because I don't want, even though Cadabra has gone off into the sunset, I don't want Learn, Lead, Lift to go off into sunset, because I don't feel like its work is done yet.
I love it. It's still like holding its torch and creating something brighter and weaving its way through the world. I think that's so beautiful, Wendy. Thank you for sharing your spirit, your time, your energy today, for being a wonderful role model and example of what it looks like to activate your capital and have so much agency and purpose and meaning. It's been such an honor to have you here today. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for tuning in to this episode of Getting Rich Together. My hope is that you leave every episode feeling more inspired, more powerful, and more connected. Until next time, remember, you have everything it takes to create wealth on your terms.